Okay, welcome to Lecture 2 or Lecture 7, Part 2, Grading and Differentiation. This lecture has two parts. Part 2 will cover readings, I believe, 1 and 2, and it's an overview of differentiated instruction, while Part 2 will cover reading 3 by providing general tips for differentiating grading approaches with a focus on the process to developing differentiated assessment. So let's get into Part 1. Our first reading, just move it over here. First reading is Assessment and Student Success in a Differentiated Classroom. So before we get started, remember that differentiation is not your ability to make new different assignments without the consideration of the entire classroom. We are all aware that our students come in with different backgrounds, cultures, accessibility, abilities, and just a plethora of different things that define who they are uniquely. However, sometimes I think that differentiation gets looped into one part, and we only focus on the product, right? We only think about the product. Hey, I have a choice board. I have 6 different ways to do the same assignment, but that's not the only thing. So I just wanted to do a brief kind of review. Remember, differentiation is a teacher's proactive response to learner needs, shaped by mindset and guided by general principles of differentiation. And those include an environment that encourages and supports learning, quality curriculum, assessment that informs teaching and learning, instruction that responds to student variance, and then leading students and managing routines. So teachers can differentiate through these avenues: content, process, product, affect, environment. We will focus on process and product as we're talking about assessments, but please make sure you're aware that the differentiation process occurs through 4 avenues. Remember, content is the information and ideas students grapple with to reach the learning goals. Process, how students take in and make sense of the content. And then product, how students show what they know, understand, and can do. Affect, environment, the climate or tone of the classroom. Okay, so we're not gonna focus on all of them. We'll just focus on those 2, as it states here. This is just serves as a pretty quick overview. Remember that when we focus on understanding, if we intend for students to be able to use what they learn, memorization is an unreliable method to accomplish that goal. Students fail to remember much of what they try to drill into their brains by rote recall, even in the short term. Further, they can't apply, transfer, or create with knowledge. They don't understand even if they do recall it. So focusing on understanding is the essential here. You don't want to overemphasize rote memory, meaning I just want you to remember the facts, And that's hard, especially in areas where memorization is essential. But that shouldn't be the only thing or the only reason why students are actually learning a skill or learning the content. In terms of differentiation, creating understanding-focused curriculum asks teachers to realize that students will approach understanding at varied levels of sophistication and will also need different support systems to increase their current level of understanding of any principle. So if we go further down in terms of assessment and understanding-focused curriculum suggests pre-assessments, formative, which are ongoing assessments, and summative assessments will center on student understanding at least as vigorously and generally more so than on knowledge and skill. So I know that a lot of you already have summative and formative assessments, but I didn't see a lot of pre-assessments. And remember, pre-assessments aren't just about the beginning of a unit. You can pre-assess what your students remember and know before you start a lecture, before you start a class section. Because how do you achieve alignment with your content being delivered and your product at the end. So when I what I like to do is assess what students know. I love doing things like what do they call it? Grammar exercises where students are required to identify parts of speech and things of that nature. Um, Typically, a do now would look like maybe write a sentence, something that brief. Now, what do I do with that information? I collect that data, and based on what I give to them, if students are missing, the verb, the noun, the pronoun, or any parts, I can separate the classroom and have that be our differentiated approach to the lesson. It's not hard, but it does take for you to be proactive instead of reactive. But you should have pre-assessments and formative assessments built into the pathway to getting to the summative assessments. There shouldn't just be a leap to a summative assessment, because that's not how it works in the classroom. And you have to think about the process prior to putting the lesson into action. It says here, in fact, assessments that help students connect knowledge, understanding, and skill will be particularly potent in the learning process. So it's your job to kind of make sure they are connecting all the pieces within the learning environment. The next reading, I told you this would be a quick one. Grading and differentiation, paradox or good practice. I thought this one was pretty good because it actually discusses a lot of things that teachers say that create difficulties when trying to put into place a differentiated lesson. So it says here, differentiation suggests that it is critical for teachers to provide multiple routes to accomplishing specified goals so that each learner can progress to the greatest degree possible. The differentiation argument is that most students can learn most things under the right circumstances. To know that they have removed barriers to academic growth for our students is part of the responsibility of professional educators. So through differentiation, you can remove those barriers and boundaries that prohibit students from learning at their best ability. The article also talks about principles of differentiation and grading alignment. So the myth is that you can't align all these things, right? That you can have a summative assessment, but you can't track back what you've done to get there, or that it's too impossible. So not true. Here, if you go to page 265 to 267, our author talks about some principles of differentiating and aligning your grading practices so that it's concise and also that is doable. So she starts off with be aware of and responsive to student differences. Obviously, you're going to start off with that because you're going to shape the learning around that, and you're going to continuously go back to knowing the differences, incorporating the differences of how students learn into the knowledge process or their sense-making process. B says specify clear learning outcomes. This is a challenging one because I think that as educators, we always think that, oh, they know what they're doing. Have you ever been in a situation where someone comes in your classroom and they ask that student that you thought they knew what was going on and they have no clue? Me? Yes. So most of the time they have no clue. It is your job to make sure that they actually clearly understand the learning outcomes or the expected goals that they are to achieve. And that can be done in a lot of ways. You can have them restate the do now or restate the goal in their do now. You can have them summarize the goals of the day in a Cornell Notes summary. You can have them create bullet points that summarize the learning objectives of the day. You can have the learning objective and the standard that they have to meet placed on top of the paper of whatever assignment that they have, and have it built into each of the activities, each component of it. So there are ways to do it. You just have to proactively ensure that it is in place. It says C, use pre-assessment and formative assessment data to chart students' progress relative to the stated goals. Remember that you are charting. That means that you should have some accountability of yourself or your charting system to ensure that you're tracking their progress. Adapt instruction in a variety of ways to ensure as much as possible that each student continues to progress in regarding to the learning goals, and we've heard that one before. E, make sure students know criteria for success on summative assessments, ensuring that the assessments are tightly aligned with those stated learning goals. And then F, provide varied forms of assessment to ensure that students have an unobstructed opportunity to express what they have learned. So that wraps up part 1. Please stay tuned for part 2 that goes a little bit deeper into some of the things we've discussed.